Dawn.
Albie Amankona, you are what I would describe as a moderate Conservative. I mean, when you look at the state of the modern Conservative Party, what were you hoping from these elections? Because there were people on, shall we say, on the left of the Conservative Party who might have hoped for actually rather bad results so they could get rid of the Prime Minister. Were you one of them?
Well, I certainly wasn't hoping for bad results for the Conservative Party. I'm a Conservative member, activist, and I'm loyal to the party. I'd never want a bad result for the party. And this isn't a bad result for the party, Iain. A couple of weeks ago, some people were predicting losses of 800 seats. That's not going to happen. And I think as well, you would have expected with all the stuff going on with Partygate and all of the scandals since last November, since the Patterson scandal, which I've spoken about a lot, you'd be expecting Labour to be doing a lot better. And this is not looking like Labour winning councils like they were in the 90s before Blair was elected.
Albie, it was Tory spinners that were prophesying 800 losses, wasn't it, as a sort of bit of expectation management. Now,
you have to erase every other political party for you to lose 800. I mean, we already hauled half the seats.
Johnny mentioned Carlisle, and the Tory leader of Carlisle Council has been super critical of Boris Johnson this evening, as have some other losing Tories around the country. Is he going to face a challenge from his own MPs for not having done as well as perhaps he should have done, given his the approach of the view of the Tories that he's their sort of winning thing when it comes to the North and the Red Wall seats in particular?
Well, Jackie, I think we're going to have to wait until we get the full picture before I can comment on anything like that. But the way that things are looking at the moment, it's not looking to me like the landslide loss for the Conservatives that would usher more MPs to put letters into the 1922 committee.
I mean, you must agree. Albie, would you give any advice to Keir Starmer on where he ought to go?
I think my question would be...
He's very good at giving advice.
Albie is very polite, but when you set him up with, would you give any advice on telling Keir Starmer where he should go? Had Albie not been so polite, he might.
Do you want to do this next year or not?
To be honest with you, it's up as 5 a.m. I'm not sure I do. No.
Anyway, Albie.
My advice to Keir Starmer would be you need to do better in the Red Wall, because ultimately the question is, does Labour need to do well in London? We already know that Labour does well in London, so Labour doing even better in London, I don't really think pushes the needle with the Labour Party winning the next general election in any meaningful direction. And I think the fact that the Tories have done quite well in parts of the country quite near to where Jonathan is from, or where my family are from, Bury, Oldham, Bolton, actually should concern the Labour Party more and give the Conservative Party more reason to be pleased about the results, or not as disappointed with the results tonight as they could have been. I mean, many of us were thinking we'd do a lot worse than we have done tonight. And I think the fact that Labour has not made any breakthroughs in the Red Wall should be a concern to Keir Starmer's Labour Party.
Just directly.
Albie, you've given advice to Keir Starmer. What advice would you give to Adrian Ramsey on making the Greens a more appealing force in British politics? Because, I mean, he sounds very reasonable, doesn't he? Which, I mean, sometimes I interview some Green politicians and you sort of hear the sound of flapping white coats. Well, you don't with Adrian, do you?
Yes.
That's a compliment, by the way, Adrian.
Adrian does sound very reasonable, but you still can't really get over the fact that eventually you want to withdraw from NATO. And I think the situation with what's going on in Ukraine and Russia at the moment just shows why those alliances are so important. It's all well and good to be talking about nice things like electronic vehicle chargers and re-greening and putting up wind turbines, but when it comes to bread and butter issues like security, policies like withdrawing from NATO are unreasonable to most people.
Well, thank you for giving me your advice. I do appreciate it. Well, the first thing I'd say is actually that the climate emergency is an international security issue now, and it
more so than Ukraine at this very point in time.
I'm not comparing the two. And
but it sounded like you were.
No, I'm not. No, it's just because you were referring to security and you were talking down what we're saying on energy issues.
I wasn't talking it down. I was just saying it's nice to talk about it, but when you talk about NATO and withdrawing from NATO in the long run, it feels unreasonable to me personally.
Well, it's more than achieving net zero carbon emissions and tackling a climate emergency is more than nice to talk about.
Labour think they have actually taken control of Westminster. Before, we were thinking that the Conservatives had lost control, but that's one thing. If Labour take control of Westminster, Barnet and Wandsworth, Albie, I mean, that is a really serious thing for the Conservatives, isn't it?
It is certainly quite significant, especially in the councils that you've just mentioned. But I think it plays into a longer-term trend of the Conservative Party not doing as well in London and doing comparatively better in other parts of the country. And that could be down to a number of reasons. It could be down to demographic change. It could be down to the pivot that we saw with the Conservative Party at the 2019 election, pivoting away from the south of the country, the home counties, the blue wall, if you call it, and up to the north of the country. There are a lot of different factors at play there, but it is certainly significant. But I think it's part of a wider trend.
Well, let's just remember, in 2018, the Tories won 41 seats in Westminster to Labour's 19.